Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Tenet. Let's talk about it. So Tenet is directed by Christopher Nolan, and it is of course one of the most highly anticipated films of the year. Even before COVID times, people were very much looking forward to this film and looking forward to the next Christopher Nolan entry because of the fact that it is directed by Christopher Nolan. He is a huge name within the industry and he has earned that through so many successful films, including of course Inception, The Dark Knight, and all of these films that are so highly regarded within the industry. And there's so few directors like him who generate so much buzz, even amongst lay people who don't really know many directors by name, that it's always an event whenever he comes out with a new film, and this film was no exception, except of course for the whole COVID situation that the world has been going through and the closure of cinemas around the world as well. And so here we have a film whose release has been pushed back so many times, of course because we didn't know when cinemas would be opening up again after the whole lockdown situation. But here in the UK they have been slowly but surely opening up, with more of them opening up this week for the release of this film. So it's a very important film for a multitude of reasons, not just because it's directed by Christopher Nolan, although of course his name generates a lot of buzz and attention, but also because it's one of the first major films to debut in the cinema, to have a cinematic release after the whole lockdown situation that we've had this year. So we're definitely in an experimental period here, trying to see how much box office this film can actually generate in light of the fact that so many of these cinemas are still closed, one, and two, people are still hesitant to go to the cinema in the first place, and three, these cinemas have limited seating options at this point because they want to maintain social distancing. I don't know how it is in the whole world, but here in London at least, these showings have limited seating options to ensure that social distancing can still take place. But that means that for each showing you're not having a maximum capacity of the seats that have been taken up with bookings, and therefore less money is made with each showing of the film. Not to mention, my cinema also offered VIP seating for the same amount of money as regular seating would be, so that's another loss on the cinema's part. So with all of that said, this is clearly a very important film in light of the terrible year that we've had, and so a lot of eyes are going to be on the box office of this film and trying to figure out how much money can actually be made during these unprecedented times in the cinemas. So here we are, finally arriving at the review portion of this video. Now before we get into it, just know for once this isn't going to be a spoiler review. This is going to be a non-spoiler review. Usually I like to dive into my reviews with a lot of depth and a lot of time and therefore they tend to be spoiler reviews because I have so much to say about the film and the plot and everything. This time around, however, I'm not even going to lie to you. I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss. I don't have much to say because quite frankly I would just be sitting here talking nonsense out of my mouth, and I don't like to do that. I don't like to discuss things from a place of ignorance. That's what would be happening if I was to discuss the specifics of this film, because guess what? It's hard. It's hard, it's difficult, it's complex. I don't understand it. I do not know what I just watched. So let's dive into it. So first and foremost, we're going to go through some of the positives of this film, okay? It's a Christopher Nolan film. It looks stunning. It looks spectacular. The aesthetic is sleek, it's slick, it's stylish. In my DC fandom video, I recently talked about how I dislike a lot of Warner Brothers blockbuster films because they tend to look really ugly and blue-gray, and they have that like color grading that's just super ugly in my eyes. But in this case, we have Christopher Nolan taking the wheel on every single aspect of the film, and guess what? It looks amazing. It looks stunning. And the action sequences, wow. Now this film has a very interesting conceit, a very interesting premise to begin with, and that helps the action sequences. You can tell that he had the action sequences in mind when he was coming up with the premise of the film, because the action sequences help to enhance the story, and the story helps to create really creative, innovative action sequences. I think it was a similar case with Inception as well, where you have those, you know, crazy kaleidoscopic action sequences that take place. You can see how the story and the set pieces meld together to complement one another beautifully, and it is the case here for the most part. And just in general, I think a huge positive of this film is having this original story be told by such a talented filmmaker. And here we have Christopher Nolan, who is creating this, you know, crazy spy thriller type of storyline that's very James Bond-esque, but has his Christopher Nolanisms inserted in there to kind of give it his own flavor and just customize the genre a little bit and inject a little bit more energy into it. So I very much appreciated that aspect of the film. And when it comes to the story itself, I think it's a great premise. It's a very interesting twist on the spy genre, but it's definitely something that works best when it's kept as simple as possible. And that brings me to not the negatives, but rather the complications of this film. And that is, I do not understand what I just watched. At all. I don't understand it. Now, here's the thing. Going into this film, there were several trailers that people got very, very excited over, but the consensus was still the same, and that was no one knew what this story was about. People had ideas about the storyline having something to do with time travel or time inversion or whatever it was, but they didn't really specifically know what they were getting themselves into with this film. And I have to say, coming out of it, I still don't know. I still am none the wiser, because this film is just so overly complicated. It's crazy. Whilst the elevator pitch for this story is fascinating, the execution of the story and the plot itself is confusing as hell. And try as they might, no matter how many times the characters stand there and spout exposition at you, trying to explain the concept of time inversion to you, you're just left mind boggled. You're just left so confused, because it's just so complex and so overly convoluted that it just makes for a very difficult story to follow, and unnecessarily so in a lot of parts. Now, on the one hand, there's definitely a positive to this, because it means people will be more inclined to go see this film again and again and again to see if they can understand it a bit better and get more of an enjoyment out of it with subsequent viewings. And that is genius on Christopher Nolan's part, because it means more business for the film, more business for the cinemas, especially in light of this year. That would very much be appreciated by them. So it makes sense in that aspect if people go see it again, just so they can understand what's going on a bit better. Maybe they've watched videos explaining the concepts behind this film, and so when they go back, they'll have a bit more of an understanding and be able to fully engage in the story that's unfolding in front of them. But on the other hand, that still doesn't solve the issue of the first viewing being really difficult to get through. And secondly, the issue or the consequence of this being so complex and confusing is that a lot of the action sequences, whilst they look incredible and bombastic and spectacular, they become more difficult to understand as well, because you don't quite fully grasp the consequences of what they're fighting for, the motivations of the parties involved, you know, what is going on. You get the overall motivation of saving the world, but why is this set piece specifically important? And I felt that especially when it came to the final action sequence at the end, where things were just happening. It was so confusing. At some point, I just had to let it all go and let this action sequence wash over me, because otherwise I was just not having a fun time. So in that sense, it can become quite difficult to fully absorb the gravitas and the weight of each of these action beats, because whilst I understood the why of what was happening, I didn't understand the what or the how. But overall, I wouldn't say that the plot itself is just a straight up negative. It's more of a complicated aspect of the film, which makes sense because it's a complex plot to begin with. But there were definitely elements of this film that I found just straight up to be negatives in general. So first of all, this is actually a positive of the film. The film's music is composed by Ludwig Göransson, who, if you know me, you know that he is one of my favorite film music composers. I think he is excellent. He has worked in the past with a lot of Ryan Coogler films like Creed, Creed 2, Black Panther, and those scores were incredible. So I'm a huge fan of his work. When it comes to Tenet, he certainly doesn't disappoint. I think the score here was absolutely perfect. It was absolutely perfect for this film. It incorporated elements of time and clocks ticking. It was very thematic and atmospheric, and just like with many of the bigger Christopher Nolan films, they have great impactful musical scores, and here is no exception. The problem wasn't with the score itself, the problem was with the volume. The volume was so high, it was so loud. Oh my goodness. I don't know if this was just my experience in my cinema, but the score and the music for this film was incredibly high. And I don't know if this was a case of, you know, sound mixing or sound editing. I'm not an expert in that field whatsoever. I don't even know if Ludwig was in charge of that aspect of the sound of the film. I just know that the music itself was so loud that it overshadowed the dialogue, and this is problematic as hell. It made it very difficult to hear what anyone was saying. And plus, the actors were mumbling. There was a lot of mumbling in this film, which was frustrating as hell. I just wish that they would enunciate every single word more, or at least I wish there had been subtitles that came with the film, or at least in my showing, because it was very difficult to understand what they were saying to begin with. And on top of that, you have a score that's incredibly loud, and it seems to be sound mixed incorrectly. Listen, I'm not an expert once again, but in my cinema, the disparity was huge. So this all created this very lethal combination of having this incredibly complex, heavily expositional script littered with all of this expensive vocabulary with an uneven volume in the sound, and overall it just made it very, very difficult to understand once again what the hell was going on. But moving away from the film's technical aspects for a second here, I will say that if there's one element that I always dock points from when it comes to Christopher Nolan films, it's the character portrayals. I personally don't find his characters, the characters that he creates, to be very engaging or very personable. They're all robotic. And this brings me to my theory, which I may discuss in a future video very soon, of Christopher Nolan is a very robotic filmmaker in my eyes. He doesn't create well-rounded and relatable human beings when he's writing these characters. He creates vessels around which the story and the world can form. And that's something that I've kind of had a hard time with when it comes to a lot of his films, because I'm the sort of viewer who likes to see characters that I can relate to, or at least characters that are incredibly memorable because of their charisma, because of their personalities that just shine through the screen. And here we don't have much of that in the slightest, which is incredibly surprising, because we have John David Washington, the first black male lead in a Christopher Nolan film, because Christopher Nolan and inclusivity just don't they don't mesh. I don't know if you've noticed. I have, though, because there isn't a single significant female black character in a Christopher Nolan film to be found. But I digress. The fact that we have John David Washington and his personality and charisma is watered down in this film is a crime. It's a true crime. He was so good in so many other things, but especially Black Klansman. To have him here just lack so much of that energy, and he doesn't have to portray the same character time and time again, but here he could have had a bit more oomph. Like, it's a James Bond-esque type of film, so where's the suave, where's the charisma, where's the charm of that kind of character? It was very much lacking here, and I can only attribute this to the way that Christopher Nolan directs his films, and more specifically how he directs the portrayals of the characters in his films. I did enjoy Robert Pattinson's performance here, though he didn't have much in terms of personality, but he added a sprinkling of individuality here, which I appreciated. I also thought it was nice to see him all cleaned up again, looking nice and fresh. Lately he's been in these films looking rough and gruff, like he's been dragged along the streets and rolled into a muddy puddle. Whereas here he actually looked showered, clean, you know, fresh, ready to do the job. I appreciated it. Kenneth Branagh is also in this film, and minor spoiler ahead, if you don't want to know anything about it, then probably you should skip forward. But he is the villain here. He is the villain of this film, and without getting too much into it, I will say that I wasn't the biggest fan of the portrayal of this character either. Aside from the story elements of the character, which again, this is more of a spoiler aspect, but just in terms of the overall presence of his villainous and antagonistic character, I wasn't the biggest fan. He is by no means one of the best villains in Christopher Nolan's filmography. I mean, the guy has Heath Ledger's Joker. In comparison, there is no comparison. How about that? Let's just put it that way. Also, I couldn't help but notice the similarity between Kenneth Branagh's portrayal of this character in this film versus his portrayal of the Russian bad guy in Jack Ryan. Was it Jack Reacher? Jack Ryan, I believe it was, Shadow Recruit from a few years ago. Those two characters that he portrays in this film, again, without giving too much away, they're almost identical. And also, side note, if you're going to have a Russian bad guy, why not hire a Russian actor at this point? I don't know personally, because I'm not from that region, obviously, but I just feel like there are probably so many actors from that region or have that heritage who could portray a Russian bad guy if they wanted to, and at least you would be elevating the status of people from that region, as opposed to using yet another British man to portray a villain, but this time with a Russian accent. accent. And again, he's done this before in Jack Ryan, so it's just doubly confusing. So overall, like I said, this film is complicated. It's complicated in terms of the script and the ideas that are explored here. Listen, I am not a physics major. I do not understand half of these concepts, and when you're trying to teach them to me in this fast-paced action film, it just doesn't quite work. And on top of that, you have the fact that I can't hear. Like, I can't hear the lesson, and I can't raise my hand and be like, miss, can you speak a bit louder, because I can't hear, because there's music playing on top of this, and it's great music, but it's super loud in comparison to the dialogue. There's so many issues there. So overall, it created a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of my viewing experience for this film. So with all of that said, I'm going to be giving Tenet a 7 out of 10. But before I leave you guys, I did want to sprinkle in a little bit of spoiler talk. So this is 100% a spoiler. If you don't want to know it, then you can click off now. Thank you for watching. Okay, so first of all, one of the biggest issues that I had with the story itself is with Elizabeth Debicki's character. Now, I think Elizabeth Debicki is incredible. I think she's very, very talented, but it's unfortunate that she keeps playing these very similar damsel in distress, please save me, oh wait, I can save myself kind of roles. I'm of course referring to her role in Steve McQueen's Widows, but she also played a very similar role to this specific film in The Night Manager, the BBC series from a few years ago that was starring Tom Hiddleston. Like, those two roles are very, very similar, and to see that again in this film was a little bit disappointing. It felt a little bit repetitive on her part, although that's not her fault. That's clearly something that Christopher Nolan wanted, and the damsel in distress is definitely an aspect that Christopher Nolan he plucked from the James Bond handbook, which I'm really tired of seeing personally. Even if she did get the revenge by killing her husband, like, I don't care, because for most of the film, she's a damsel. Not to mention that John David Washington's protagonist for who? Protagonist for who? He risks everything so that he can save her. During that car chase, he gives the bad guy, he gives Kenneth Branagh the plutonium so that he won't shoot his wife. And I was like, why are we doing this? I thought he was like highly trained and world renowned for his work on the field. Like, I thought he had a reputation. How is he giving up so much for her after meeting her once, and now all of a sudden his entire mission is revolved around saving the world, but also her and her son? Am I supposed to care about her son? How? And that's what I mean by Christopher Nolan not being great at creating these relatable characters, because throughout the whole film she's like, yeah, I want to save my son, and I'm like, yeah, but we also need to save the rest of the world in both the past and the future and the present, ideally. So what's going on? Like, why? And to make matters worse, she could have compromised the entire mission by killing her husband before she was supposed to, before she received the signal. She was so selfish in her own wants and needs. All she could think about was, oh, my situation. They're trying to save the whole world. They're trying to save the whole world. And I know there's a commentary in there somewhere about the damsel in distress, white woman trope. But it was just, if there is, it wasn't well explored. It just made for a very shallow character. And finally, another plot line that I really disliked was the villain's plan in general. He wanted to destroy the whole world because he was dying. Is that it? Like, have I understood that correctly? And I understand, because there are controlling elements to this character weaved in throughout. They're of course exhibited by the way that he treats his wife in a very controlling manner. He has a hold over her because of that painting, and so he's taken control of her entire life. She's unable to leave, blah, blah, blah. I get that aspect. But the fact that he wanted to destroy the whole world, and he has a son in it as well. And he was like, the biggest regret that I have is bringing a son into a world that I knew was going to be destroyed. I think I just quoted that verbatim. Wow. I think I just quoted that verbatim. But yeah, I still don't buy it. That wasn't my favorite. Can we please find villains with proper motives, please? So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Tenet, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the film down in the comments below. Or let me know if you're just going to see the film overall, or if perhaps the cinemas in your area still aren't open yet, or if it's not safe for you to go. I'd love to know everyone's situation here, because these are such unprecedented times. So no one should feel obligated to go see this film, because of course public health and safety comes first. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of this release, of the film specifically, any thoughts that you might have. Please be sure to subscribe so you can catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.